Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
I'm about to set down on paper a sequence of indisputable happenings. At some of the incidents I was personally present, and the story of the others has come to me through the testimony of unimpeachable and trustworthy witnesses. I am a country physician, having practiced in this single village all my life, as, indeed, my father did before me. The people here are farmers, mostly of Dutch or German descent, with a few Poles and Lithuanians. About 2 miles beyond the village, Hans Ludwig Brubaker had his farm. The farm is still there, and it is worked by relatives, but Hans is gone. No one definitely knows where, or what, he is. We can only guess.
Nobody knows where or what he is. Uh-oh. This sounds like it's got all the makings of a strange story, which are the exact kind of makings we enjoy here on Strange Studies of Strange Stories. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And I'm Chris Lackey. We are kicking off a month of scary tales from the pulps, starting with The Crawling Horror by Thorp McClusky.
Both this story title and this author's name sound like they were made up for a movie in which they needed a generic horror story and author, but they are the real deal. Just like our reader today, returning to the show, it's Craig Johnson.
Welcome back, Craig.
You may know him as the deranged janitor from Chad Vader, or from his work co-hosting the film review show Welcome to the Basement. We know him here as the reader for Bears Discover Fire, which was a recent favorite show and story. So glad to have him back. And he is not the only luminary appearing on the show today.
That's right. We are joined by writer and game designer Robin DeLaws.
Welcome, Robin.
Hey, it's good to be here, and I'm glad to be here to talk about a work by Thorp McClusky, because as you say, that is the best name. We lost something when we stopped having surnames as first names. You just don't see that anymore.
I agree. Robin, we haven't had you on since way back in 2020 when we were discussing stories from Robert Chambers' King in Yellow. It seems like it was more recent than that, but that is likely because we both listened to you on the excellent podcast, Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, which Robin hosts with our guest from last month, Ken Hite. What else have you got going on these days, Robin?
Well, the thing that I would most like to point people to, if you're at all interested in tabletop role-playing games, is my upcoming, or possibly by the time you hear this, actually released at the Pelgrane Press web store. That's pelgranepress.com. And that is Hamlet's GM Screen, which is a book that takes my method of breaking down narrative into its little moment-by-moment components, initially seen in my book Hamlet's Hit Points, which showed how narrative works to tabletop role-playing gamers. That looked at Casablanca, Dr. No, and Hamlet, of course. The main point that I got from people who loved this weirdly popular, abstruse book was they wanted a version that would provide a lot more actionable gaming advice for the table. And so this analyzes classic moments at the gaming table and breaks them down according to their narrative beats. So everything from session 0 to a fight to getting information to a total party kill. We look at those in terms of what are all of those moments and what is their emotional engagement, what makes us fearful, what makes us hopeful. And that's exactly the sort of thing that also happens in any short story and any horror short story about protoplasmic terror. And if you're just interested in regular narrative, in storytelling and writing, a previous book that uses the same system that's also available from Pelgrane Press is called Beating the Story. So that's, if you're not a tabletop role player, but you want to see what I'm talking about, you can check that book out as well.
Speaking of tabletop role-playing games, our crowdfunding campaign for Strange Stories, the role-playing game, is alive and kicking.
If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do. Just head on over to strangestoriesthegame.com. There's even some protoplasmic monstrous masses in the game.
There is.
Speaking of that type of monster.
Now this story, The Crawling Horror, how did you find it?
Like many other recent stories we've covered, I pulled this tale from The Century's Best Horror, which is an anthology, a 2-volume anthology edited by author and horror genre historian John Pellin. In the anthology, there is one story for each year of the 20th century, and this was the selection for 1936. And I'll read what Mr. Pellin had to say about it at the beginning, and this is what attracted me to the story. In a year that saw the stunning debut collection of stories by Charles Birkin, The Graveyard Rats by Henry Kuttner, work by the Weird Tales Big Three, Howard, Lovecraft, and Smith, as well as notable work by Manly Wade Wellman and Paul Ernst, the November issue of Weird Tales featured a story by a writer that's been all but forgotten today. The Crawling Horror by Thorp McClusky, a tale that predates John W. Campbell's memorable Who Goes There and may have served as an inspiration for Ted Klein's The Events at Porth Farm. McClusky's tale was an instant classic. You know, I love all those other tales that Pellin mentions there, so I had to give this one a shot, and I liked it. Robin, have you ever heard of this author before?
I heard of him when you assigned this to me as homework. So I went and did my homework. So Thorp McClusky, little is known of him because second and third tier weird tales or pulp writers have not been adequately researched. Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty clear he's from Arkansas. His life, other than his publications, is kind of vague. You will hear references to him having a day job, which is extremely credible given that short stories alone do not pay the bills now or then. And since he didn't have a novel career per se, that checks out. What exactly the day job is, sources differ. We do know that he wrote for a bunch of other adventure mags and for the U.S. Army and for the Reader's Digest later on. Mm-hmm. He also wrote an alternative health book. This was his bestseller, Your Health and Chiropractic, which is very appropriate for a horror writer, given that chiropractic medicine was invented by a ghost.
What?
Yes. So, briefly, the person who invented chiropractic originally said that he was instructed in this by the ghost of a dead doctor. And since that's a giant digression, if anybody wants to hear the whole story on how chiropractic is total ghost woo, listen to Ken and Robin talk about stuff number 535, and you'll get the whole story.
Well, I will listen to that. You know, that's weird because there is a huge chiropractic college in our hometown, Palmer College of Chiropractic. I think I misheard somebody talking about it before because I thought there was a ghost in the school.
Could be the same ghost.
Yeah.
Let's be parsimonious with our ghost.
Well, maybe they were trying to tell me that a ghost runs the school. I'm not sure.
Maybe the ghost just has tenure?
Yeah. Well, current practitioners, you'll be surprised to hear, try to conceal that part of the story. So maybe the ghost is mad that they're distancing themselves from him. And he's like, No, remember, I taught you this. I am a ghost.
Yeah, I couldn't find much about McClusky. I found one article, a bio from a Substack called The Obelisk, and it was titled Much Needed Praise for Thorp McClusky. Of his genre fiction, his earliest published work was Luther the Vampire, which appeared in the June 1936 issue of Weird Tales. It was a novella about a police commissioner, Charles Etheridge, and Detective Lieutenant Peters, who would conduct occult investigations.
For Weird Tales, he also published a ghost story called The Considerate Hosts, as well as a post-apocalyptic story of some kind called The Red God Laughed.
As Robin said, he was born in Arkansas in 1906. According to that article, he died in 1975. This story, The Crawling Horror, was first published in Weird Tales in the November 1936 issue.
That Substack article says this story was a big hit with Weird Tales readers. I don't know what the metric is to decide that.
It was not the cover story, which went to a Seabury Quinn story, but he did finally get a cover for this story in an anthology in 1948, the Avon Fantasy Reader number 6. And so it has a cover with a strategically nude Hilda, who we'll introduce in a while, melting away into protoplasm as two men wilt in horror on this sort of Deco-Gothic looking staircase that looks nothing at all like the inside of a farmhouse, but there you go. So he did finally get his cover, and he got a little bit of a boost for the story in the preface to that.
We're going to have to track down that cover and post it in the show notes.
Well, our tale begins with our narrator, Dr. Kurt, a small-town physician. He's going to tell us about this guy, Hans Brubaker. Something happened to Hans, and this story is going to explain why the good doctor doesn't know where or what he is.
Now, there is no way of definitely knowing just when the strange progression of events, at first of seeming unimportance, began. But with the whole story complete, although I cannot say when it began, I can tell how it began. I know that during the first months, Hans did not suspect anything out of the ordinary. Obviously, he misunderstood and so ignored the small beginnings which led slowly, step by step, toward horror. He told me possibly 3 months ago how it had begun.
We go directly to that meeting a few months ago and we hear firsthand from Hans how this all started.
Some strange things have been going on at the farm for a while, but Hans didn't notice much at first.
At first, he heard what he thought were just rats fighting in the walls. And I like how that's not a big deal to him, you know?
That's actually a really great horror image. One of the things this story does quite well is it starts with the least horrible thing and then slowly escalates. And so rats fighting in the walls is something that can really happen in actual life in itself would be extremely disturbing as it happens.
Yeah, I'd move to another state. That's something I wouldn't. Rats fighting in the walls, like aggressive rats.
So with this introduction, we get a taste of McClusky's writing. First of all, it starts with the very standard horror opening where you're assured that these events actually happened. That goes all the way back to Poe. There's reason later to question the degree to which everything is documentable, but that's a different thing we'll get to later. And we also see his prose style, which is lean and modern and spare compared to the big three. So Lovecraft, Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, they all have big prose styles. Ironically, and I'm sure you've discussed this many times on the show, they were often dinged for having those big outlandish prose styles, each of them very distinctive, but very out there in all different ways. Yet Thorp McClusky, who writes the way that people were supposed to write in this era, and I would argue should try and do more to write now, is forgotten, and the guys with the crazy wild prose are the ones we remember.
It's often your flaws you're remembered for, right?
Well, is it a flaw, though, right? If everybody loves them for those things, are people, in fact, looking for a play with language that goes beyond the respectable? Are we looking for the disreputable in horror? I suggest that we possibly are. Yeah. But you can see the contrast with the dialogue for Hans, the farmer. Imagine how Lovecraft would have written the dialogue for a farmer and how big the dialect would be. And here, McClusky writes the dialogue in a very restrained way where you can just see that this guy is a rural guy who is less educated than the doctor when he recounts his own dialogue, but it's very subtle in a way that would have passed muster in literary circles and is not as nearly as dialect heavy as Lovecraft would have done it.
Yeah.
But Hans, as he's relating the story, is kind of trapped in a Lovecraft tale when he's saying, I have rats in the walls. And I thought that's all it was at first.
Besides the rats, there's this strange plopping sound inside the walls, which he assumed was just a really big rat. But then he started to notice mice were missing, again, assuming that this big rat was scaring them off.
The mice were all running away from the farmhouse, scared off by what he assumed was that big rat. And his cats are loving this because then they could pick off the mice as they fled the property.
But then the cats start turning up missing as well. One day, a very pretty white cat showed up, not one of his cats, but then that cat was gone too. So were all the other cats.
It says, I tried to feed her and pet her, but she wouldn't come near me and wouldn't eat. Seemed only interested in Peter, a big tiger cat of mine. Well, that was natural, even if it did seem funny that she wouldn't eat. Peter watched her some, and that night he stayed out. He never came back. And I never heard the big rat from that night on in the walls again.
And that's another great horror image of having the cat being pretty. So it combines beauty with the demonic. That's demonic in the literary sense of being horrible, not this is literally a demon. It's some other thing. You will see this again and again as the sort of central imagistic juxtaposition of between the beautiful and natural exterior and the horrible protoplasmic inside.
I didn't really pick up on that. The only thing I got from that at this point was that he didn't know the big white cat. And I wondered, oh, so this thing doesn't just... Well, I was kind of tipped off from the mention of who goes there in the beginning that we were going to have a thing situation here.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe it would be absorbing and imitating, and the fact that it was showing up as a cat that he didn't know at all, maybe that's a neighbor's cat or something, but it seems to create original identities as well. The other thing I was sort of thinking about was the Renfield structure to it. Something moving up the food chain. You know, there might have been a whole drama with flies and spiders that we didn't know about, but it went from the rats now to the cat. I thought maybe the Dracula comparisons would end there. I was surprised to find that wasn't exactly true. We'll get to that soon.
Well, Hans relates that he was sitting on his chair by the fire, smoking his pipe and having a bit of a doze, and then his two collies, Nan and Peg. Nan was beside him, Peg wasn't around, and he reached down to pet the dog, but what he felt wasn't a dog. It was slippery, and there wasn't any hair on it, he says. He's startled, and he jumps up to see what he touched.
It was a slimy sort of stuff, transparent looking, without any shape to it. It looked as though if you picked it up, it would rip right through your fingers. And it was alive. I don't know how I knew that, but I was sure of it before I even looked. It was alive. And a sort of shapeless arm of it lay across the dog's back and covered her head. She didn't move. I hit at the thing with the poker, and Quick as thought, the whole mess started sliding across the floor, stretching out as worms do, oozing under the crack beneath the door that leads onto the porch. Before I knew it, the thing was gone. I looked at Nan. She hadn't moved. She seemed asleep. I shook her until she opened her eyes. And her eyes looked dead.
So that's yet another example of the source of comfort. You know, your dog who you're petting turns out to be horrible.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is yet another echo of that theme coming up of the outwardly comforting and the inwardly horrible.
To me, this is one of the scariest parts of the story, that idea that you would reach down to pet the dog and touch something unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Yeah, the prose has a great tactile evocation of what it would feel to reach down and feel a slime dog.
Ugh, nobody wants a slime dog.
Nobody wants a slime dog.
Hans looked around the house and he couldn't find anything. The other dog, Peg, didn't come back that night, which was unusual. But in the morning, Peg was on the porch. He was glad to see her. When he let her in, she immediately started growling at Nan and attacked her. Nan didn't fight back, so he had to drag Peg off of her. Strangely, Nan didn't seem bothered, even though she was bleeding very badly. Her injuries were so bad that Hans took her out back and shot her. He was devastated after this. After digging a hole to bury her body, he went to go grab the body, and it was gone.
Just the imprint on the grass where the dog's body had been. Robin, we foisted the story on you, like I said. What were you thinking at this point? Were you excited about this? Were you like, why am I reading this?
Well, I guess this is where we have to get into why this story is important. It is historically the first of the protoplasmic doppelganger stories. And the reason that it becomes important is actually summed up in the preface to the story in that Avon Reader anthology from 48. And that's by, the anthologist is Donald A. Wollheim, who was an early fan. He helped sort of build the infrastructure of fandom. He was an author, and he was a prolific anthology editor, and he died in 1990. He, in his introduction to this story, points out why this is an important story, which was relevant even in 48, which is that it's a precursor to Who Goes There. He credits the story to Don A. Stewart, which is the pseudonym of John W. Campbell. He was the science fiction writer and then longtime editor of Astounding, which became Analog magazine. Interestingly, Wollheim, in his introduction, pretends that this is a beginning of a whole big trend. He says, several of the collectors of this fearful legendary have affixed a name of their own for this being. They call it a vombus. From this, they have derived an adjective, vombic, which has come to mean in fan circles something like weirdly sinister. Have you heard the word vombus or vombic?
No.
Did that pass into the lexicon? No, Donald Wollheim did not make vombic happen.
He was trying so hard.
But this raises the question, what the heck is he talking about? What he's referencing, and I don't know if you've done this story, is Clark Ashton Smith's story, The Vaults of Yovombus.
Oh, yeah.
Which, from 1932. And so that's a science fiction horror of a Martian expedition that encounters a furry, formless, slug-like parasites that absorb their victims. And so he's trying to sort of suggest that the more important John W. Campbell did not rip off the crawling horror, but in fact that this is part of a long tradition, which of course is just established a few years earlier by Clark Ashton Smith.
We did cover the Vaults of Yovombus. That was episode 543, if folks want to track back to that. We've covered Who Goes There as well. It is interesting to see the lineage of this specific type of horror.
You got your two branches. You got your protoplasmic absorber, and you've got your alien doppelganger. And this is the story that joins those two together. And they're both found in Who Goes There, which becomes Thing from Another World, which becomes a thing. And then there's a doppelganger branch, which is most obviously typified by Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was a novel by Jack Finney, that became a film by Don Siegel, remade by Philip Kaufman in 78, Abel Ferrara in 93. And you see all sorts of different versions of that. There's a Next Generation episode that's clearly based on it. The Faculty by Robert Rodriguez is based on that. And so that one takes the fear of you being replaced or possessed And then you get your humbler protoplasm, focusing more on just being a blobby thing that absorbs you. Shoggoths, of course, from At the Mountains of Badness, which also come up in this era, fit that bill. The famously in cinema, The Blob from 1958. And in the world of gaming, that's a whole category of monster. You've got your gelatinous cube and your black puddings. And so this story is the goopy seed that creates all of those other protoplasmic absorber doppelganger monsters.
We're talking about doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers perhaps next month. It's a classic novel we've been wanting to cover for some time. So I'm glad to know we're first doing the goopy seed that led to that.
Back to the story. A few weeks later, Hans says that he saw a dog that looked like Dan hanging around the farm. And a few days after that dog was gone, and a new dog showed up.
One that he didn't know.
And then Peg disappeared.
Whatever the thing is, it seems to be this blobby, nasty hair gel in its original state, and it can imitate things that I assume it is absorbing, and each life form gets larger, so maybe it's absorbing these other creatures to gain mass?
Right, and there's a great weird detail where he says, I remember thinking that it must have weighed about 50 pounds. Which is scary because it defies logic, but also like, how do you know from looking at it what it weighs? And so that logical dissonance is part of the horror because it defies common sense.
Yeah, well, this is all going to be explained in my prequel story about Hans's career in the carnival, where he would guess folks' weight.
Yeah. Why, you look like a fine protoplasmic blob. I think you're about 50 pounds.
Can't wait to read that.
I'm working on it right now.
Hans finally gets up the nerve to tell the doc what he wants to say. He thinks that this thing has gotten to humans, and he explains why. He saw this kid, maybe 12 or 13 years old, walking down the road in tattered clothes, and he assumed that this kid was a runaway. Hans thought, maybe I should try and help the kid, but then there was just something off about the boy, so he didn't approach him, and he didn't do anything.
He says, I went down the driveway and I almost called out to him, but I didn't. It was as if something inside me said, don't call. That thing you see there isn't a boy. It's death in the shape of a boy. I was scared and ashamed too. I was so ashamed that I went right down to the road with the idea of yelling at the boy. Then I happened to look down at my feet.
It's cold in the story. It's in November. The boy left footprints in the ice. Now, the ice is very strong, and normally you wouldn't crack the ice because it would be so, but he's saying that this kid was heavier than he looked, that he was breaking the ice.
I thought that it was going to say that there were no footprints, like the imitation was somehow weightless, but it's the opposite. Like this little boy is much more dense because of all that other absorbed material, perhaps.
Hans asked the doc, am I crazy? And the doc says, no. And then Hans says, well, what should I do? And the doc says, look, let me think about it. Come back tomorrow. Not long after that, Hilda Lane comes in to ask the doctor what Hans said to him.
This is Hans's fiancée. The doctor says talking with her was different from talking with Hans. She was a beautiful young woman, tall, long-waisted, slender-limbed, with fair blue eyes and yellow hair and gloriously clear skin. There was something imperiously demanding about her that disturbed me. I guess the difference is that he's attracted to her. That's the difference.
So you can tell we're in the realm of pulp literature because you can tell who the author's type is, which was true from this era until about the 90s. As she is described, she's not only very beautiful, which will be important in the horror because we're juxtaposing beauty with protoplasmic terror, but also this reflects the sort of women that was basically the type of every pulp writer at this time, which is a coolly assertive dream girl instead of like the later manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. She's going to help you solve the mystery. And if you don't want to involve her, she's going to come along anyway.
Yeah, she's a little bit smarter than you are and maybe can handle some things and help you out. And of course, it's very interesting that at a time of greater limits on women, that the assertive woman is the attractive type, and then later when you get into the feminist era, you start to get a lot of helpless or wishy-washy women as the leads, which tells you something about the men writing those pieces.
Right, yeah. Well, she asked the doc, is Hans crazy? And he says no. He might be fooling himself, but he's not crazy. And she says, that's good because I plan on marrying him. But if he's in danger, I want to be with him and I want to help him. She leaves. Hans doesn't come back to the doctor's office, and Kurt hears that Hans and Hilda got married and she's living out on the farm. A few days after that, Dr. Kurt decides he's going to go check on them.
I felt like the story was a little clunky there. I mean, it seemed like a very imminent horror that he was dealing with, and then there's this break, and they get married. I guess they do it hastily, so maybe she can move in and be with him to help him, but it seemed to kill some momentum. Of course, then I looked at the storytelling and went, oh, it's the crawling horror. I shouldn't expect too much speed.
When the doctor goes out to check on them, Hans talks in hushed tones when Hilda isn't around, and he says that there's danger there, but he's trying to protect her from it. He tells the doc to come back that night when Hilda is asleep. So that night, around 11 o'clock, Dr. Kurt comes back, and Hans meets him outside.
Healthcare is not what it used to be, by the way. I've been trying to get a doctor out here late at night to hear my theories about danger. There's a 10-month wait.
Hans takes the doc inside, and he can see that Hans has put putty on all the windows and the doors to seal them.
Stuffed it into all the cracks in this section of the house to keep the blob thing out, and I don't think he's explained things to his wife. Like when she goes to sleep, he seals up her bedroom as well, but then he removes the putty before she wakes up. Is that right?
Yeah. And Hans, he looks very, very tired, and he explains that he hasn't slept because he's been keeping a keen eye out for this thing. And Hans says that the thing can get you when you're sleeping or unless you invite it in. And then I thought to myself, well, how does he know that? How does he know that it can get to you if you invite it in?
And this is not the first assumption that one of the characters comes up with completely unwarranted without any reason for them to know this except for narrative convenience.
Mm-hmm. Things were crawling along so well until then, but I had the same thought. How in the world would he know that? And also, that was where I went, oh, it's not just the Renfield relationship. We've got a blob situation. We've got a thing situation combined. But this McClusky character is trying to shove a Dracula in here as well.
Well, the doc says, look, man, you got to go to sleep. I'll keep an eye out. Almost immediately, Hans falls asleep in the chair, and the doc is just hanging out. But then he sees something move at the window. He walks over and he looks and sees that something has wiped away the freshly fallen snow.
It's a peeping blob. That's good use of the snow, though, right? Like the fact that you can see evidence that something was there.
The doc goes outside to take a look, and he sees tracks in the snow, but the tracks look like it's a ball rolled, but then it stops, and there are human footprints from that. So Dr. Kurt runs back into the house, finds Hans. He's awake and nervous because he felt the door was open because of the cold, and the doc explains why he left, and Hans asks about the tracks.
Tracks like nothing on Earth, or human tracks? My voice was harsh and high-pitched as I answered, tracks like both! Just trying to take direction from the author here.
Right. So we're positioning the creature not as supernatural, but as alien. Tracks like nothing on Earth.
All right.
Again, we don't know why Hans has reached this conclusion. We could forgive him if he thought this was some sort of magical creature, but he's identifying it as science fictional. And that's how blobs mostly remain. Even shoggoths remain creatures of science fiction, not of supernatural horror.
Well, the doc, he decides to stay there all night, and he leaves in the morning before Hilda gets up. He comes back that evening to see that Hilda is much more serious, and it's obvious that Hans has let her in on what is going on.
It says, stamped on the faces and engraved in the speech of both man and wife was a determination to fight the thing that threatened their home. This is my favorite line. Hilda, brave girl, brought out a pinochle deck. But before we could sit down to play, there came an interruption.
There's a knock at the door. It's Farmer Brandt, and his daughter is missing. She wanted to marry a man that he didn't approve of, so she ran away. They tell him if they see her, they'll let him know. After he leaves, Hans is like, did it get her? And the doc says, no. This is obvious. She ran away because she was mad at her dad, so don't worry about it.
Now, I did have a question about that bit of text. I didn't necessarily draw the same conclusion as you.
No?
Because it says, presently the man went out. Do you think it was that? Hans asked when he had gone. I shook my head. It was perfectly plain what had happened. So that seemed ambiguous to me.
Yes, I think he thinks she's been got.
Oh.
I thought it could mean either. It was perfectly plain what had happened, but you have to define what perfectly plain means.
It's not perfectly plain. It's somewhat confusing, as a matter of fact.
I'm guessing they just went, yeah, she's probably been gobbled up on.
But then if that is the assumption he's making later on in the story, then it's crazy because we're going to find out later.
Yeah, let's just...
Okay, that's why I assumed that was his assumption, is that, oh no, she just ran away because she was mad at her dad. But anyway, moving on. After that, there's no sign of the thing for a few days. However, Dr. Kurt gets a message from Hans that he needs him to come by.
That's a classic horror technique of letting the tension relax for a little bit. There's a little downtime period, an idyll, if you will, which of course makes no sense if you're afraid that there's a monster stalking your property, but at least in emotional beat terms, makes sense, if not in logical terms.
Yes. Now, the thing is back. They say to the doc, if you're quiet and still, you can feel its presence. And he gets quiet, and he can feel it. There's just something off. Hilda and Hans are obviously exhausted, and he tells them to get some sleep. He will keep a lookout.
I did like that the crawling horror is obviously this creature itself, but it also is a reference to that feeling.
Hilda goes to her room, and Hans stays with the doc, and the doc has come to some conclusions.
Yeah, I have to quote these exactly because it's kind of nuts. It says, "We can beat this thing in 2 ways, Hans. We know that it is a mass of dead alive cells controlled by a deathless, malign entity." They know that.
They know that.
The Slavic people had the right idea when they, as they thought, trapped vampires in their coffins, drove stakes through their hearts, and sealed the coffins. What they did not truly realize was the nature of the being they combated. Because the thing is half physical, it has, to an extent, physical limitations. It must sleep, and what, in effect, those old-timers did was to catch their vampire asleep and seal it in a box, which, fortunately, happened to be strong enough to resist its physical strength. The stake through the heart meant nothing. It was the airtight, solid coffin that did the business, restrained the thing until, as its physical substance slowly died, so was its spirit rendered homeless. He's like revising folklore.
Right, which is a Lovecraftian thing, right, to talk about the superstition and then the alien nightmare behind it. But we're all zeroing in on what if I was still wearing my short story editor hat, would have said to Thorp McClusky, which is, how does he know this? You've given no basis for him to have this information.
None.
You could have had a couple of lines in there, which is, while they were waiting on the farm for something to happen, I hit the books and hit the library and researched the alien protoplasm. But no, he's just apparently spinning this off the top of his head. And I think we're all zeroing in on this as the point that kind of damages the credibility of the story, except with this upcoming other thing that's about to damage the credibility of the story.
Well, right, because it goes on from there. He says, now we know that this entity is strongly attracted to this particular vicinity. In the course of time, it'll find a permanent place. I don't know why he knows that. No. Where it can sleep, a barrel perhaps, or a cistern, or even a casket if there's such a thing available. And if we can find that hiding place, and while the thing is within, seal its receptacle hermetically tight, we will have beaten it. Well, okay. That seems, looking at the fact that it's blobby and can slip through cracks, I can kind of see where they come to that logic.
Okay.
But then he says, there is yet another way to beat the thing, Hans. That way is for someone to invite it to absorb him, if it can. The entity will try, Hans, for it knows nothing of fear. Then, if the man's will is greater, the man will win. Otherwise, the thing will absorb him, continue to grow, and he will cease to exist.
Yeah, all completely unsupported. There's no reason for him to know any of this.
Yeah, where does that come from?
Yeah, a couple of lines about hitting the books would have helped, but no.
While he's doing his crazy talk, Hans falls asleep. The doc checks on Hilda. She's fine, but then there's a knock at the door, and it's Bertha, the farmer's daughter. She's cold, she's wet, she's shivering, and Doc Kurt lets her in? What?
Yes. This is the other even worse emotional logic gap. This is clearly idiot plotting, where the doc is either as smart as he needs to be to move the story along, or in this case, as dumb as he needs to be to contrive toward disaster. And so perhaps this is why the Campbell story is better known than the crawling horror.
Yes. Bertha asks the doc if he knows that she ran away, and he says yes, but don't worry about it. So we have it here. She can talk, and she knows things about Bertha, this entity, because we all know it's the creature pretending to be Bertha at this point. But this is some new information that it can talk and that it's intelligent and it knows the things that the person that it absorbed knew, which is pretty dangerous. It says that he's suspicious here, but not suspicious enough to actually do anything. He tries to feed Bertha, but she says she's not hungry. She's just tired. And again, earlier, remember he tried to feed that cat. The cat wouldn't eat. She wants to go in and sleep in Hilda's bed with her. What? How does she, one, know that Hilda is there and where she's sleeping and that she would be okay with Hilda? Like, there's a lot of weird stuff going on here.
It's easy to explain what the blob is doing. It obviously has some sort of telepathic understanding of what's going on in addition to the memories of the people and personalities that she's absorbed. But again, Doc, what are you thinking? Like, what is going on here at all?
And he allows himself to get distracted making some coffee or whatever. And she's like, I just want to go lie down with Hilda. And she just goes and does it.
And again, if a couple of lines were inserted here saying, somehow I found myself coming under the power of this entity, which seemed to be staring at me from the primordial void, there you go. It doesn't take a lot to make this make sense.
No. She goes in, lays down with Hilda. He goes through the doorway. The lighting isn't good because the room's dark, but it seems like he can see Bertha and Hilda melding together.
Uh-huh.
As my eyes became more accustomed to the dimness, I could see that there on the bed, there were no longer two women. The two bodies were pressing together like ghastly Siamese twins, dissolving together into one. My heart in that instant froze like a lump of ice. Somehow, my whole body trembling horribly, I leaped across the half-darkened room, knelt on the bed, and dug frenzied fingers into the thing that had looked like Bertha, and that was now eating the sleeping woman, dissolving her as might a powerful acid. My fingers, beneath the muddy, tattered garment, sank deep, not into the firm flesh of a living girl, but into a yielding mass of protoplasmic slime. Then I screamed, and as I fought and tore at the flaccid, jelly-like mess, I screamed again and again without pause, like a madman, without hearing my own voice, knowing only, from the tautness of my throat and the beating of my breath, that I shrieked.
It's stupid in setup, but that was a pretty creepy scene.
It was.
Yes, the actual description and the next part where it describes Hilda's half-dissolved body is sort of a highlight of the horror writing of this piece, and that's what really sells it, despite the sloppy emotional logic.
Yeah, it's pretty gross, too, because he can't quite get a hold of this thing and pull it off, and he could see that Hilda's being dissolved, but then Bertha's voice comes out of the thing and says, I didn't do it, Dr. Kurt, I didn't.
So the things this entity consumes really are stuck inside of it as well, with some kind of consciousness, right?
Maybe? Well, he pulls Hilda away from it, but only part of her comes off.
There was left only half a body. Her spine lay bare, her ribs curved nakedly, her skull gaped, her entrails drooped across the dingy carpet. It was like a slaughterhouse in hell. That won me back.
The doc's losing it, but just then Hans comes in and he starts blasting it with a rifle, but it doesn't do anything to the blob. It moves towards Hilda's body, and then the crazy frickin' doctor tries to hold it back, but it slides around his hands and through his fingers. Hans gets up, goes to the kitchen, grabs some putty, and blocks all the gaps. He's going to trap the thing inside.
He says we can trap it as the blob, and if it becomes a person, it's mortal and we can fight it.
He gets some paper and twists it into little torches and lights them up, starts burning the thing, and the place fills up with this horrible smelling smoke. The thing tries to keep away from him, but then he just keeps pressing it. Finally, it turns into Hilda, and that stops Hans from attacking.
Standing there naked, the thing picks up what's left of Hilda's clothes and puts them on. She tells Hans in Hilda's voice that she wants to leave, and he tells her that's not happening. He's going to burn her.
The thing says, if you burn me, it's going to burn Hilda. She's in here with me somewhere. And then he says, well, I'll starve you. And then she goes, well, then Hilda's going to starve too. They're at a bit of a stalemate. Then Hans says he wants to try the other way. Oh, no, not
Yes.
the other way.
Yes! Yeah. You know I love a good fight it, I know you're in there scene. So this, I didn't mind that it was going that way.
Yeah, the doc says, sure, give it a go.
I mean, I guess it's more the Exorcist ending, right? Take me, come into me, spare her.
Right.
Although she's already been devoured, so it doesn't really spare her.
No, it doesn't.
Right. And the creature is acting like a seductive folk devil now. We've gone from vampire to devil, where the creature is bargaining, trying to strike deals. And,
yes.
Threatening suffering to Hilda, who I have to assume everybody who's still in there, if their consciousnesses are in there at all, and it's not a ruse, would also be, she's already suffering. So's Bertha. So's the dog. Like,
yeah.
Let's put them all out of their misery would be a better answer.
True.
Yeah. Well, Hilda hugs and kisses Hans, and then she begins to atrophy and then vanishes into Hans. Hans looks confused and then speaks to the doc in a voice like Hans, but immeasurably more beautiful, immeasurably more strong.
It's kind of a weird comment.
Yeah, it is a weird comment.
The scary beauty is back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just the moment where he goes, that's Hans. That's Hans speaking, but my God, is his voice beautiful.
He says that we worked together. Hilda, Bertha, the boys, the dogs. We all used our wills and beat it. As he walks, the floorboards begin to give and break a bit, so he's really heavy. He tells the doctor that no one is going to believe any of this, and that the doctor has to tell everyone that Hans went crazy and killed Hilda and Bertha and the Peterson boy. Go to the police, and I'll be gone. You'll never see me again.
He led me from the house. Then I was sitting in the car, the motor running softly, while Hans stood there before me in the damp snow. He extended his hand. "Goodbye." "Goodbye," I said inanely. And while yet he stood there in the snow beside the house, I drove away. Thus it is that our village believes that Hans murdered with bloodthirsty abandon, and then, fearing detection, mysteriously escaped. I alone know the truth, and the truth weighs heavily upon me, and so I have begun to prepare a record of the true happenings in the Brubaker case, and presently I shall see that this record is brought before the proper authorities. Meanwhile, I wonder, where and what is Hans?
That's the end of the story.
This also raises the question, Doc, what? should you maybe be doing something more active than writing a report? Maybe you should have killed Hans on the spot when very clearly he was the monster and telling you what you wanted to hear and showing all the evidence of being the monster. And this also belies the introduction where it says, this is also backed up by the testimony of others. What others? They're all a blob now. I don't know to what extent we're meant to perceive Doc as an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
And to what extent we're supposed to be critiquing his actions. I think due to the simplicity of the storytelling that we're not meant to question all of those things. But you could impose a reading on it where the doctor is an unreliable goof who's allowed the monster to escape, which in fact he has.
And on that level, I think it kind of works. If the doctor is the one that came up with this harebrained idea, he's the one telling the story where that was a bad idea, and he convinced Hans to go along with it. And then Hans just got eaten up by the monster, and the monster knows everything Hans knows, so he would tell him what he wanted to. He goes, yeah, just let me go. I won't cause any more problems. I'll just live happily as Hans. And he's like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then he's like, what a sucker. This guy's a complete idiot. But it still works, like in that, because people do dumb things. They'll want to believe and they'll take actions because they want that to be the truth, even though it's obviously not the truth.
I think that's a strong reading that isn't actually supported in the text, that you have to impose that on it. And that perhaps Thorp McClusky, like many a pulp writer, wrote a couple of quick drafts and didn't get the editorial intervention he required.
Probably.
Yeah. I actually thought you guys feel pretty strongly that the blob absorbed Hans and is just saying what it needs to say.
Yeah.
But I thought, wasn't it said, if a man's will is greater, the man will win. Otherwise, the thing will absorb him. So I thought it was like he absorbed the blob and he's got it in check.
Hans confesses. He says, and yet I can feel the thing inside me, like a devilish flame that would eat me if it could. It is in me, and I think that it cannot escape. I pray that it never overcome me and escape.
Right.
At that note, what would Kurt Russell do in this situation? Would it involve a flamethrower? Yes, it would.
Yeah, he'd burn him down. You're right.
Yes.
And so I think this is exactly what Campbell picked up on when he read this story and went, wow, this is a cool creature. It will be later known as a vombus. And then what if I wrote a story where the people reacted completely logically to what the creature was doing and had to overcome that in classic science fiction problem-solving manner. Mm-hmm. And there were a series of counter moves by the creature as we went along and make it more of a science fiction story and less of a horror story, and that's where you get Who Goes There.
Thank goodness, because it is a great idea, and it deserves a better treatment than this, although I did enjoy this story.
There were some genuinely creepy, scary things in here, and I thought that some of the writing was rock solid. It
has some really strong horror moments, horror writing, and most importantly, the creature is very vivid.
Yes.
And has a couple of exciting core ideas about it, which is why it goes on to spawn all of these other key pieces of pop culture.
My biggest complaint about it, honestly, was I didn't think he needed to wedge a Dracula in there. That was so unnecessary. Remove that and it's a near perfect story, in my opinion.
Well, I don't know about that.
Hey, I want to once again thank our excellent reader today, Craig Johnson. Was so glad to have him back on.
And I want to thank Robin for taking the time out to talk with us. And I want to remind everybody to go and pick up Hamlet's GM screen.
Thanks a lot. It was great. It was great to be here.
I also want to thank some of our patrons, and I'm going to start by thanking these 5. Lucas Hanna, thank you. Matthew C. McHorris, thank you so much. Philippe Kennedy, thank you. Rachel Brown, and Tobias Britton, thank you so much.
I'd like to thank Tamara Parks, Dan R., Sean Logan, Don Lee, and Jean-Luc Lizard.
Oh, love Jean-Luc Lizard. You know who I also like so much are our stakers. They make these free shows possible, and I'm going to name all of them real fast right now. I'm talking about Bag of Weasels, Cryptocartographer, Alistair Brooks, Continental Breakfast, Schmile Khan, Christopher Roster, It's a Ghost, Kip Barnes, John Morgan, Angelina Brown, Eric Esvalon, MD, Richard Wolf, and Ben A. Thank you so much for continuing to be stakers. We're going to be back next week with another horror story called Celui-là by Eleanor Scott. I hope you will all tune in to hear about that. It's a really cool one. Until then, I am Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm special guest Robin DeLaws.
And you've been listening to
Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
Strange Studies of Strange Stories.